Welcome to Program 5 of Public Speaking for Lawyers. This program is about your voice. It's called Speaking Well, and at the end of this program, you'll be able to control your pace by speaking in phrases, not whole sentences.
You'll understand how to be precise by emphasizing key words with your gestures and your inflection.
And to sound decisive and confident by walking up and down the steps of inflection.
In order to speak well, you have to have control of your pace. And to get control of the pace, you have to understand how we're going to link up the cognitive psychological term chunking with a very specific instruction about how to make that pace be consciously and mindfully under your control. Now recall that chunking is what our brains like. We like information in chunks. You could make the analogy that when we are talking to people, it's not unlike feeding a small child a big piece of meat and saying, let me cut that up into more digestible chunks. That's what chunking is all about. We are, if you will, feeding the listener in bite-sized chunks so they have time to process. Especially if you as a lawyer are speaking to an audience of non-lawyers. Those of us who need help understanding you, because if you are that classic sort of fast-talking lawyer, we don't have a way to process what you're saying. We need it cut up into manageable chunks. So here are some simple mantras to control the pace, to build on this notion of chunking, and it begins with this simple mantra. If you want to be articulate, speak in phrases, not whole sentences. Listen to that again, and listen to my deliberate breaking that into 3 chunks. If you want to be articulate, speak in phrases, not whole sentences. Well, let's make that our link between what are chunks and what are phrases. So chunking and phrasing become analogous in what it is that we're talking about. So we're taking the chunks of language and saying, let's call them phrases, because think about this. We do not think or speak one word at a time, that when we think or we speak, we're putting language together, not a word at a time, but in phrases. So there's the building block, there's the unit we're after, there's the chunk, it's the phrase. So we're back to the instruction. If you want to be articulate, speak in phrases, not whole sentences. Now that leads us to this. When do we ever speak in phrases? And the answer is we speak in phrases when we speak together. Imagine a group of citizens of the United States saying together the Pledge of Allegiance. In fact, say it with me, because we are all going to say the first sentence of the Pledge of Allegiance in 3 chunks, or 3 phrases. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America. And that's the rhythm that we use when we say the pledge. No one has ever said it differently than that, have they? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America. 1 sentence, 3 chunks. We're going to use that simple rhythm to say, okay, well, there's something that everyone who's a citizen of the United States has already deeply ingrained in their consciousness. So let's listen to that again. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America. Let's turn that into rhythm, gibberish, if you will. Bum 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 bum, bum bum bum, bum 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 bum. So that's the way we all say it. But now let's turn that gibberish rhythm, bum 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 bum, bum bum bum, bum 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 bum, into a much more concrete instruction. So that's the rhythm I can use to control the pace that I'm speaking. Say that with me at that rhythm. Listen to it one more time. So that's the rhythm I can use to control the pace that I'm speaking. Say that. So that's the rhythm I can use to control the pace that I'm speaking. Now, if you find that a little odd, let's put back in the thinking noises that way too many of us use way too much of the time in conversation when we are not being self-conscious and merely being natural. The ums, the likes, the you knows. Would we ever say the pledge as, I pledge allegiance to the flag like of the United States of America, you know? Well, what are those noises? Those little noises we are inserting between those phrases and sentences. But for our purposes here, we're getting rid of them. We're saying, let's speak in phrases, not whole sentences. And between those phrases, let's give ourselves time to think. So that's our goal, is to say we're turning the phrasing from chunking into phrases, and now we're going to speak in phrases. If we give ourselves that instruction, it really boils down to this, that when we stand up, we're not making a speech, we're not saying an idea, we're not even speaking a whole sentence. We're going to begin by speaking in phrases. And after that first phrase, we're going to put in that first pause. And that sets up this rhythm that allows me to talk forever. So the great paradox of speaking is, as we've said earlier, the talking is easy, the not talking is hard. But once you learn to stop as the talker, then you can talk forever. It's the people who talk too quickly and speak in phrases and run it all together with no breaks between that lose their ability to think, and therefore they can't talk. So there's our goal. Speak in phrases, not whole sentences.
Your goal now is to speak in phrases, not whole sentences. You may be noticing that we're talking about the music of your voice. We're starting now to listen to what it sounds like and what the emphasis should be as you speak in public. The reason we want to concentrate on it in this technical way is that when we stand to speak in public, if we speak too quickly, all music drains out of our voices. We tend to stand up and speak too quickly, and once we speak too quickly, we just don't have the same music we have, that same expression, as if we slow the pace down and speak more deliberately, and then let the language ebb and flow. So even though we're now instructing you to figure out how to speak just a phrase at a time, perhaps only a few words at a time before you finish a given sentence, we're not saying you should speak that way through an entire address, through a long topic. Language ebbs and flows, which is part of why it's so wonderful and fun to be able to speak extemporaneously, that is, in a structured improvisational way. You can make choices that become interesting and artistic or more emphatic. Let's talk now about the individual words inside the phrases that we're speaking. Our goal is to begin a sentence, work our way through that thought in phrases, and then end it by walking down the steps of intonation. Ba-bum, ba-bum, ba-bum. We leave a pause, and then we start a new sentence. So we're thinking now of sentences as undulating musically. We want to figure out, how do we emphasize the words inside the phrases to make our point, to make the audience understand what's really important. So for example, if I'm standing in front of a group of people and I'm giving them an update on some matter, I might say, "She never promised the shipment would arrive by Tuesday." And it sounds like I mean a certain thing. But if I go back into that sentence and something was really important about the person who made the promise, I would say, "She never promised the shipment would arrive by Tuesday." Or, "She never promised the shipment would arrive by Tuesday." Now we can start to pick apart language, phrase by phrase, and make our intent really clear. So as we work our way through any given thought, the way we emphasize words lets our listeners know what our attitude is, what we want the outcome to be. We might say, if your authors sign a contract with that particular phrase, they are giving away their ebook rights. So we want to say exactly what we mean, instead of if you let your author sign that kind of a contract, they're giving away their ebook rights. There's not enough information embedded in that sentence for your listeners' brains to know what's important. We need specific words to be emphasized. We need ideas to be kind of inflated as we elongate the words and make them vivid, more memorable. And we do that by making a vowel big. If you let your authors sign that kind of a contract, they're giving away their ebook rights. We can now hear all the consonants. And I'm not saying that it should be theatrical or over the top in any way, but this is what emphatic language sounds like. Individual words are given lots of emphasis, and that lets us know what's really important. At the same time that we're looking for these emphatic words, we're gesturing. And again, we're showing things, we're talking about signing documents, e-book rights. Our hands already know where the emphatic words go. So we want to make sure that as we speak with emphasis, our hands are there to help us. Most of what our hands will do is instinctual. It just happens. If we put our hands in a ready position and then release them, they go where the emphatic words are because they know. Language is encoded in our hands. They're very smart, so don't try to second guess them. Let them help you talk. She never promised the shipment would arrive by Tuesday. My hands knew exactly where to go, and I didn't have to tell them in advance. But you could hear what my hands were emphasizing in the way it makes my voice pop on those important words. So emphasizing and gesturing can't really be separated. The more you let your hands help you, the more they will realistically, and not in kind of any artificial way, emphasize the key words you're looking for. And without the key words, those most important words, your legal concepts are not going to pop either. Emphasize the information you really want people to remember, not just with your gestures, but also with your voice. One reason we're such fans of figuring out how hands work is that not only does it make your ideas clear to your listener, you are showing people what you mean, but we can hear your gestures in the sound of your voice and ultimately in the way your face lights up. You could deliver a long public extemporaneous address in which you imparted lots of information without any gestures or without much inflection. But the moment you let your body get involved, the language grows and gets more interesting because your hands know how to lead it through all the most important inflective moments, all the music that makes the difference to what you mean. And meaning is what we want you to get to, especially describing such important things as you lawyers have to describe all the time. So to emphasize key words, let your hands get involved.
To our first two mantras about speaking, speak in phrases and emphasize key words, we need to add one more. And it has to do with the literal music of your voice going up or going down. And we need to begin to think about inflection and hear inflection with this simple demonstration of how attuned your ear already is to what we do as we speak. I don't even need to use a word. I can just make a monosyllabic noise and you know what this noise means. Huh? Huh? Let me slow that noise down. Huh? And we all know that that noise, huh? What I would call a kind of questioning curl as I slide up on that pitch, huh? Is a question, right? True? Correct? Huh? And we know that that noise has a different meaning than this noise. Huh? 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 There's something about that going down that is not the question of huh, but a more affirmative huh. I understand. Huh. Got it. And those two noises are different from this noise. Huh. Huh. Wow. And that high-pitched noise, huh, we could make analogous to an exclamation mark. I'm exclaiming with that, huh, wow, cool. So, Think about those noises. The question, huh? The exclamation, huh? And the period, huh? Well, think about how attuned our ears are to finality. How much, for example, everyone who has ever said the Pledge of Allegiance sends that final phrase walking down the steps, as we call it, or descending to a lower pitch, with liberty and justice for all. Period. And we all say it that way because we know we've come to the end, period, with liberty and justice for all. No one has ever made it a question, with liberty and justice for all? And no one's ever walked up the steps, if you will, to that exclamation mark, with liberty and justice for all, even though the words might suggest that kind of enthusiasm. So let's focus, for our purposes, on what we would call the audible period. Because all of those noises I've just made, we could describe as audible punctuating. Huh? 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 But like as writers, the period is the most useful thing as a speaker, like it is on the printed page. And so there's a real value to understanding the use of the audible period, with liberty and justice for all. Think about, as another example you've heard a million times, but you've probably never put it into this context, and that is, how does every newscaster sign off a newscast to indicate that they're done, to get to that sound of finality? Well, every newscaster signs off by that walking down the steps. If I were a news reporter and I would end my news report, I would say something like this: Brian Johnson, ABC News, Washington. Doom, doom, doom. Brian Johnson, ABC News, Washington. Period. I'm done. So let's develop this idea a little further, the value of the audible period. I bet no one has ever critiqued your writing and said too many periods. In other words, a period is something you can use a lot. On any given printed page, there are many of them. Similarly, as speakers, you can use the audible period. It has several advantages. Number one, it is the sound of finality. So we could literally say, as a speaker, because I'm engaged in structured improvisation, that audible period buys me time to think. And it signals to the listener, I'm done, because my voice has clearly said to you in that final cadence, that's the end of that, period. So we could analogize that space on the printed page that follows the period before the next capital letter is that 1 second of silence that we need as speakers to decide what's next. Well, that gives us time. There's another advantage to that noise, and that is it says to the listener, I'm saying this with absolute certainty. So it is the sound of certainty, as well as the sound of finality. Now think how often you've used that. You've never thought of it this way, certainly, but we say things in conversation like, oh, come on, use your common sense. Doom, da, doom, da, doom. That's a version of walking down the steps. Use your common sense. Or, that is absolutely ridiculous. And we walk down those steps. Now, of course, just to add a little more variety to what we're talking about, there is the walking up the steps. That is ridiculous. Oh, come on. Use your common sense. But I would say, just like writers, especially legal writers, are not going to use a lot of exclamation marks, the same might be true of us as speakers. The same might be true of us as speakers. It becomes a little bit too much like a used car salesman if we do too much of that. So back to walking down the steps. It's the sound of certainty. It's the sound of finality. It buys you time to think. So we could string our 3 suggestions about your voice together into one very simple instruction, and that is, speak in phrases, emphasize key words, and walk down the steps. And suddenly you've got a way to control the pace by speaking in phrases, making it meaningful by emphasizing key words that unlock the meaning, and buy yourself and your listener time to think by descending to that lower pitch, by walking down the steps. Now, a word of caution about the questioning curl. We live in a time in which that questioning curl, what some people call the uptalk, or we think of it as the uptick of an uncertainty, that uptick of uncertainty is a constant use of the questioning inflection even when making a statement. So imagine if I introduced myself in this very program with a constant use of that uptalk. Greetings, my name is Brian Johnson, and welcome to Public Speaking for Lawyers. And if everything I said went up, in this particular way. It sounds a little bit like everything I'm saying is a question. And think how common that inflective pattern is, especially among young people. So no one has ever decided to use that inflection and use it a lot, over and over again. So what's the fix? It doesn't work to say, stop doing that up talk. The fix is to say, I need to walk down the steps. I need to make that sound of certainty, which is the very opposite of and that uptick of uncertainty. So we're looking now to get control of your voice. And we're going to do that with this particular simple mantra. I'm going to say it and then you say it after me. Speak in phrases, emphasize key words, and walk down the steps. That gives you control of your voice.
To speak well, talk to yourself and say, control the pace by speaking your first sentence in phrases. Say that.
Hear the silences between the phrases. Say that and do that.
Gesture immediately and allow your hands to emphasize key words. Say that.
To end your sentences decisively, walk down the steps. Now say that and do that. And if you do those things and say those things to yourself, you will be able to speak well as you think on your feet.